Night falls over the ruins of Mesopotamia. The desert air is still, broken only by the whisper of wind over ancient stone. Beneath a canopy of stars, a ziggurat rises like a shadowed pyramid against the moonlight, its crumbling steps leading upward into the heavens. Torchlight flickers across weathered bricks, illuminating inscriptions pressed into clay 5,000 years ago. The words speak of beings who from heaven to earth came. These ruins belong to the oldest civilization humanity remembers, the Sumerians. Their writings, their temples, and their myths still whisper of a pantheon of powerful figures. The Anunnaki. But who were they? To scholars, they are gods, symbols of power and order. To others, they were something more. Visitors from beyond the stars, cosmic travelers who shaped mankind's destiny. For centuries, the story of the Anunnaki has never died. Instead, it has grown, shifting between history and speculation, archaeology and imagination. Were they simply the creations of a fertile human mind, seeking meaning in the unknown? Or were they real beings, their presence carved into stone, their memory encoded into myth? Tonight we stand at the crossroads of fact and wonder. The ruins are silent, but the question echoes louder than ever. Were the Anunnaki gods of myth, or strangers from distant worlds?
Between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the first spark of civilization flickered to life. This was Mesopotamia, the land where rivers tamed the desert, and human ingenuity built something enduring. Nearly 6,000 years ago, the Sumerians rose here and gave the world some of its greatest firsts. They carved wedge-shaped signs into clay, creating cuneiform, the earliest system of writing. They devised laws that governed beyond the strength of kings. They measured the heavens, cultivated the soil, and raised cities from mud brick into stone. In this ancient landscape, power was not only earthly. The Sumerians believed their society was shaped and sustained by gods, the Anunnaki. Theirs was a pantheon unlike later, simpler systems. Dozens of deities, each tied to a city, a force, or a function, filled their world. At the center of Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, and Uar, monumental ziggurats rose as stairways between earth and heaven. On their summits, priests offered sacrifices, burned incense, and sang hymns, believing these acts sustained divine favor. The Sumerians did not see kings as mere rulers of men. Kingship itself was a sacred trust. Ancient tablets described kingship as something that descended from heaven, a gift that could be withdrawn as swiftly as it was given. A ruler did not reign by birthright alone but through the sanction of the divine. Enlil, Enki, Inanna, and Anu, the principal deities of the Anunnaki, were invoked in ceremonies that tied the authority of kings directly to the realm of the gods. To historians, this system reveals the fusion of religion and politics at civilization's dawn. To the Sumerians, it was reality. Their tablets do not separate myth from governance, nor ritual from daily life. The Anunnaki stood above their fields, their courts, and their battles, unseen but ever present. The gods had created order from chaos, and humans were bound to maintain it. And yet, woven through these early writings is a tantalizing thread. The Anunnaki were not described as distant abstractions. They were said to descend, to establish, to measure the heavens. These verbs, rich in imagery, invite speculation. Were they metaphors for divine action, or memories of something more literal? This is the question that lingers as we stand among the ruins of Uruk or gaze upon the ziggurat of Uar. Did the Sumerians imagine gods who mirrored their own rulers, or were they recalling beings they believed had truly come down from the sky? The cradle of civilization is also the cradle of one of history's most enduring mysteries. Sumerian mythology does not whisper, it declares. From clay tablets, fragments of hymns, and epic poems, the voices of gods and heroes resound across millennia. At the center of this mythology stand the Anunnaki, whose roles extend from creation to judgment. The myths describe a world brought forth from chaos, divided by powers too vast for mortals. Enlil, Lord of Wind, held sway over earth and sky. Enki, Master of Water and Wisdom, devised arts, crafts, and the subtle workings of life. Inanna, both radiant and fearsome, embodied love, fertility, and war. And beyond them loomed Anu, the High Father of the heavens. Unlike the gods of later monotheistic traditions, the Anunnaki were neither infallible nor distant. They labored, quarreled, punished, and rewarded. In the myth of Atrahasis, they grew weary of their toil and fashioned humankind to carry the burden of labor. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, they grant kingship but deny immortality, establishing boundaries between mortal ambition and divine prerogative. The imagery is vivid, God stepping down from the heavens, decreeing destinies, building the structures of order. In the hymns, they are described as descending in glory or measuring out the heavens. To the faithful, these were divine truths expressed in ritual language. To modern readers, the language stirs a different unease. Were these metaphors for the unseen, or reflections of an experience that ancient eyes struggled to describe? Importantly, the Anunnaki were not a single deity but a collective, sometimes a council of judges, sometimes a gathering of destiny-decreeing powers. Their very plurality gave them weight. They were not imagined as phantoms but as rulers whose decisions had consequences in the mortal realm. And yet, here lies the paradox. These stories are myth, saturated with symbolism. They also remain strangely concrete, gods who descend, who build, who command. The space between metaphor and memory is narrow, and within that space, centuries of speculation have thrived. The discovery of Mesopotamian ruins in the 19th century opened a door long sealed by time. Archaeologists uncovered libraries of clay tablets, each pressed with the wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform. When deciphered, these texts revealed epics, hymns, contracts, and chronicles, evidence of one of humanity's first civilizations. They also revealed the Anunnaki. For mainstream scholars, the evidence is clear. The Anunnaki were gods of myth, their stories no different in essence from the pantheons of Greece, Egypt, or India. The language of descent and creation, they argue, is symbolic, a way for early humans to explain natural forces and the structure of society. The gods embody the river's flooding, the storm's violence, the fertility of soil, and the authority of kings. Archaeological context supports this view. Ziggurats were temples, not launch pads. Tablets are filled with prayers, hymns, and administrative records, not technical schematics. Excavations at Uruk, and Eridu reveal religious architecture and daily life, not evidence of machines or alien visitors. But outside the academy, other voices rose. In the 20th century, writers like Erich von Daniken and Zecharia Sitchin insisted the texts contained a hidden record of human contact with beings from the stars. Sitchin, in particular, argued that mistranslations concealed references to spacecraft, advanced technology, and genetic engineering. To him, the Anunnaki were not metaphors but cosmic visitors. This divergence produced a sharp divide. On one side, the discipline of history, cautious and methodical, committed to evidence. On the other, speculation that reimagined myth as memory, offering bold answers to humanity's oldest questions. The clash is not merely academic, it is existential. Are we reading poetry or testimony? Did the Sumerians invent their gods, or record encounters with something they could not fully comprehend? The debate itself has kept the Anunnaki alive in the modern imagination, poised between archaeology and wonder. In 1976, Zecharia Sitchin published The 12th Planet, a book that would ignite one of the most controversial theories about the ancient world. Sitchin was not a trained historian, nor an archaeologist, but his interpretation of Sumerian texts has captivated millions. Where scholars saw myth, Sitchin saw memory, records of contact between humanity and visitors from beyond the stars. At the heart of his claim was Nibiru. According to Sitchin, this was a massive planet on a 3,600-year orbit that occasionally crossed into Earth's neighborhood. When it last passed close in antiquity, he argued, its inhabitants, the Anunnaki, descended to Earth. Their mission was not benevolence but necessity. They came to extract gold, which he said was needed to repair their planet's atmosphere. In Sitchin's vision, the Sumerian gods were not divine abstractions but flesh and blood beings. They mined Earth's rivers and hillsides for resources. Yet labor weighed on them. So, according to his reading, they turned to genetic engineering. By fusing their own DNA with that of early hominids, they created a new being, humankind. In this narrative, humanity was not born from natural evolution or divine spark, but from alien design. Even kingship, Sitchin maintained, was alien in origin. The rulers of Sumer and Akkad were chosen not by divine sanction but by the Anunnaki themselves. These kings were managers, intermediaries set over the new species to enforce labor and obedience. The concept of kingship descending from heaven became, in Sitchin's hands, evidence of extraterrestrial control. His books built an empire of influence. Translated into dozens of languages, selling in the millions, they spread far beyond academic circles. Television shows, documentaries, and entire subcultures drew from his reinterpretation. His vision gave cosmic drama to ancient texts and offered readers an answer to the question of why civilization appeared so suddenly in Mesopotamia. Yet the academic response was swift and severe. Philologists dismissed his translations as faulty, pointing out that terms like Nibiru and Akkadian referred not to a planet but to a celestial crossing or point of transition in the heavens. Astronomers rejected the possibility of a hidden planet with such an orbit, noting that no evidence supports the existence of Nibiru. Geneticists dismissed his claims as impossible, given the complexity of DNA manipulation. Despite these flaws, Sitchin's ideas endure. For many, they filled a gap left by scholarship, a grand story of origins that bound human history to the cosmos. For others, his work blurred the line between rigorous translation and imaginative speculation. Today, his legacy remains controversial. To the mainstream, Sitchin distorted ancient texts. To his followers, he revealed truths that scholars ignored. In either case, his vision changed how the world speaks about the Anunnaki. No longer only gods of Mesopotamia, they became, in the popular imagination, travelers from the stars and creators of humankind. If Sitchin's claims electrified readers, the question remains, do the ancient texts themselves support them? The answer lies in the thousands of clay tablets recovered from sites such as Uruk and Nippur, tablets that preserve humanity's earliest literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh recounts a king's quest for immortality, framed by gods who decree his mortality. The Enuma Elish tells of cosmic battles and the ordering of the heavens. The Atrahasis epic describes gods weary of labor who fashion humankind to carry their burden. These stories are vivid, but they are mythological in form. They explain origins and human limits, not historical events. Alternative theorists seize on phrases like, the gods descended, or, heaven and earth were measured. Sitchin transformed such expressions into evidence of spacecraft and alien activity. Yet the language, in its original Sumerian and Akkadian, is symbolic. Words like an, sky, heaven, and verbs for, descent, carried ritual significance. They referred to divine authority manifesting, not physical beings landing from orbit. Cylinder seals have fueled further debate. Some show winged figures, radiant suns, or clusters of stars. To archaeologists, these are symbols of divinity, fertility, or cosmic order. To ancient astronaut theorists, they resemble astronauts in suits or diagrams of the solar system. The most cited example is Seal VA/243, which appears to depict a large star surrounded by smaller bodies. To scholars, it is a symbolic scene, deities before a radiant god. To Sitchin, it was evidence that the Sumerians knew of planets beyond Saturn. The problem is that astronomy offers no support, and the supposed solar system diagram matches no accurate planetary order. Here the divide becomes clear. Scholars read the texts and artifacts within the context of Sumerian religion, economy, and culture. The gods are metaphors for forces beyond human control, rivers, storms, kingship, fertility. Their myths weave meaning, not physics. Theorists, on the other hand, read them through the lens of modern imagination, projecting spacecraft, planets, and technology onto clay and stone. Linguists stress that mistranslations drive much of the controversy. Sitchin's rendering of Nibiru as a rogue planet is rejected by consensus. Akkadian usage shows it meant a crossing place, sometimes of rivers, sometimes of stars. To impose planetary identity is to step outside the text. Yet fascination persists. The tablets remain unchanged, but interpretations evolve. They continue to inspire awe because they stand at the threshold of civilization, where humanity first wrote its questions about the cosmos. Whether read as myth or misunderstood history, they keep alive the sense that the earliest people saw themselves as bound to powers that descended from the skies. The question is not whether the Sumerians described spacecraft, they did not. The question is why their language of gods descending still resonates today. It speaks not to aliens, but to humanity's enduring need to seek connection with the heavens. Archaeology grounds myth in stone, clay, and soil. In the ruins of Mesopotamia, the material record offers a powerful counterweight to speculation. It tells us what the Sumerians built, how they worshipped, and how they lived, and it reveals a civilization remarkable in human achievement, not extraterrestrial influence. Excavations at Ur in the 1920s uncovered one of the most iconic monuments of Mesopotamia, the Great Ziggurat of Ur. Rising in step terraces, faced with fired brick, it was a temple dedicated to Nana, the moon god. In Sumerian texts, ziggurats were described as bonds between heaven and earth. They symbolized a sacred axis, connecting human ritual to the divine realm. They were not functional towers but spiritual bridges. To stand at the base of such a structure is to understand that heaven meant transcendence, not orbit. Eridu, the city of Enki, reveals another truth. Archaeologists have uncovered successive layers of temples built one upon another, going back to the Ubaid period around 5000 BCE. Each layer represents centuries of devotion, expansion, and renewal. The stratigraphy tells us that gods were honored with continuity, not with technology. Enki's sanctuary was filled with libations, fish offerings, and figurines, reminders of a god tied to water and fertility, not machines or cosmic mining. Artifacts further strip away the myths of misinterpretation. The royal tombs of Ur yielded treasures of gold, lyres with bull-headed ornaments, and the famous standard of Ur, a mosaic box showing scenes of war and peace. These artifacts demonstrate artistry, ritual, and political power. None provide evidence of advanced machines or alien visitors. Writing itself confirms this. The Code of Ur-Nammu, among the earliest legal codes, lays out laws and punishments under divine authority. Tablets from temple archives record grain rations, labor assignments, and hymns to the gods. The cuneiform record is vast, but it is overwhelmingly practical and devotional. Astronomy highlights both sophistication and limitation. The Sumerians tracked the movements of Venus and Jupiter, recorded eclipses, and built mathematical systems to predict celestial cycles. Yet their cosmos was mythic. Stars and planets were deities, their paths divine decrees. They were not studied as destinations but as symbols of fate. Comparisons sharpen the point. The Greeks gave us Zeus with thunderbolts, the Egyptians Ra in his solar bark. These gods were not real beings wielding weapons or sailing ships, but metaphors that embodied natural power. The Anunnaki belong in the same category, divine figures crafted from human imagination to explain order and chaos. The archaeological lens reminds us of the danger of projection. The ruins of Ur, Eridu, and Nippur reveal temples, law codes, and ritual artifacts, not spacecraft. To interpret them otherwise is to overwrite the evidence with modern fantasies. The Anunnaki endure not as astronauts, but as symbols of humanity's earliest search for meaning in a precarious world. Despite the clarity of archaeology, certain images carved into stone have fueled speculation. To some, the art of Mesopotamia depicts technology beyond its time. To historians, it reflects symbolism and ritual. This tension between image and interpretation has shaped one of the most persistent debates about the Anunnaki. Cylinder seals, pressed into clay to mark ownership or record transactions, often show divine figures. Some appear winged, others holding curious objects. Among the most debated motifs is the rod and ring. Found famously on the stele of Hammurabi, where Shamash hands these emblems to the king, they represent justice and divine authority. Yet in speculative writings, they are reimagined as tools or devices of alien origin. The archaeological consensus is clear, they are symbols, not technology. Winged discs provide another case. Common in Assyrian and Babylonian art, they symbolized Shamash or Ashur, hovering above kings and temples as emblems of divine oversight. Their stylized wings and radiant centers have been compared to flying craft, but no text supports such an interpretation. To the ancients, these images conveyed power from the heavens, not machines descending from the skies. Seal VA/243, housed in Berlin, is perhaps the most misused artifact in this debate. It shows a deity seated before attendants, with a central starburst surrounded by smaller dots. Alternative theorists, including Sitchin, claimed it depicted the solar system, with unknown planets beyond Saturn. But scholarly analysis rejects this. The dots are decorative or symbolic, the starburst a god. The proportions and numbers do not match any accurate planetary order. Textual references reinforce the symbolic nature of these images. Myths describe divine journeys, sometimes in chariots or boats of heaven. But these were literary devices, like Apollo's chariot or Ra's solar bark, metaphors that gave movement to celestial forces. To read them as spacecraft is to strip them of cultural meaning. Projection is the problem. Modern eyes, conditioned by rockets and satellites, see technology where ancient artists saw theology. A wing becomes a thruster, a rod becomes a control stick. But this is not how Mesopotamians understood their world. For them, imagery expressed cosmic hierarchy and divine legitimacy. The fascination endures because the images are ambiguous enough to invite speculation. A cylinder seal viewed in isolation can stir the imagination. Yet the context, the archives, the temples, the inscriptions, returns the images to their intended meaning, power, authority, and divinity. The archaeological verdict is firm. The Sumerians recorded symbols, not schematics. Their gods held emblems of rule, not devices. Their heavens were realms of fate, not destinations in space. The technology of the gods was metaphor, and its endurance lies not in machines but in myth. The Anunnaki did not disappear with the fall of Sumer. Their names and functions endured, reshaped by the empires that succeeded the Sumerians. Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians inherited the pantheon, adapting it to their own political and religious needs, ensuring that the Anunnaki remained central to Mesopotamian culture for nearly 2 millennia. When Sargon of Akkad created the first empire around 2334 BCE, he invoked Ishtar, the Akkadian equivalent of Inanna, as his divine patron. Kingship remained inseparable from divine sanction, described in texts as something handed down from the great gods. In these new formulations, the Anunnaki were not discarded but incorporated, their roles adjusted to the needs of empire. The Babylonians reordered the pantheon, elevating Marduk. In the Enuma Elish, recited annually during the Akita festival, Marduk defeats the chaos monster Tiamat, then reorganizes the divine assembly. Yet the Anunnaki are not erased, they remain the collective powers who decree destinies. Their continued presence demonstrates how older traditions were reinterpreted rather than abandoned. In Assyria, the gods were harnessed to imperial ambition. Ashurbanipal, who ruled in the 7th century BCE, claimed divine authority as protector of Assur, Ishtar, and the Anunnaki. His library at Nineveh preserved thousands of tablets, including Sumerian and Babylonian myths, ensuring their transmission. The Anunnaki thus survived not only as living religion but as literature, copied and studied centuries after Sumer itself had fallen. Artifacts reinforce this continuity. Hammurabi's basalt stele, now in the Louvre, shows the king standing before Shamash, god of justice. Rays extend from the deity as he hands over the rod and ring, symbols of law and order. This image echoes older Sumerian motifs where kingship descends from heaven. It illustrates a principle that outlasted dynasties: authority on earth was inseparable from the will of the gods. Claims that the Anunnaki's influence extended into Hittite or Persian religion are best treated cautiously. These cultures had their own divine assemblies and cosmic orders. Yet the concept of a council of gods, decreeing human fate, does show striking parallels across the ancient Near East. Whether this was direct borrowing or independent development remains debated. What is clear is that the Anunnaki endured as flexible symbols. In one age, they were creators, in another, judges of the dead, in yet another, legitimizers of imperial power. Their adaptability was their strength, allowing rulers to draw on ancient authority while reshaping the myths for new contexts. For scholars, this legacy demonstrates continuity in political theology. For alternative theorists, the persistence of the Anunnaki hints at memories too consistent to dismiss. Either way, the gods of Sumer shaped the civilizations that followed, leaving behind a tradition preserved in texts, monuments, and law codes. They remind us that the Anunnaki were not only deities of the past but enduring figures of cultural memory. In the modern world, the Anunnaki have escaped the boundaries of archaeology and scholarship. They have become figures of fascination, conspiracy, and pop culture, reshaped by writers, television, and the internet into symbols of hidden history and cosmic intrigue. The revival began in the mid-20th century with Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. 1968, von Daniken argued that many ancient monuments were too advanced to have been built without extraterrestrial help. He pointed to Mesopotamian myths as evidence of ancient astronauts, with the Anunnaki recast as spacefaring visitors. In the 1970s, Zecharia Sitchin expanded this with his Planet Nibiru theory, presenting the Anunnaki as miners of gold and genetic engineers of humankind. These ideas flourished outside academia. They found a platform in mass media, radio shows like Coast to Coast AM, bookshelves in airport stores, and later, television. The History Channel's Ancient Aliens, first aired in 2009, brought the Anunnaki to mainstream attention, portraying them with computer-generated imagery as astronauts descending to Earth. On YouTube and social media, countless videos echo and expand these themes, blending archaeology with science fiction. Conspiracy narratives intensified their appeal. Some claim governments and museums suppress evidence of the Anunnaki, often citing alleged Smithsonian cover-ups of giant skeletons. Others link them to shadowy elites or bloodlines that supposedly preserve alien ancestry. Still others weave the Anunnaki into theories about global governance, claiming their descendants still rule behind the scenes. These conspiracies reflect less about ancient Mesopotamia and more about modern distrust of authority. Why do such stories persist? Partly because the Anunnaki embody archetypes that resonate across time. As creators, judges, and rulers, they symbolize power that transcends humanity. In an age of rapid technological change, reimagining them as astronauts feels natural to many. They provide an alternative origin story, one that links humanity directly to the stars. At the same time, they reflect modern anxieties. Questions about surveillance, control, and manipulation are projected backward into myth. The Anunnaki become metaphors for unseen forces that shape our lives. Their story has been adapted not because of new evidence, but because it provides a framework to express enduring fears and desires. For historians, the distinction is critical. The clay tablets speak of gods, not astronauts. Archaeological evidence points to religion, politics, and culture, not spacecraft or genetic experiments. Yet the fascination itself is historically significant. It shows how ancient myths continue to be reinterpreted, carrying new meanings in each era. Today, The Anunnaki are not only scholarly subjects but cultural icons. They appear in novels, video games, and music. The very name now evokes mystery, part archaeology, part science fiction. They are no longer confined to Mesopotamia but belong to the global imagination. The irony is clear. In their modern reinvention, the Anunnaki have become what the Sumerians never intended, cosmic travelers. Their persistence in conspiracy and culture tells us more about ourselves, our longing for mystery, our suspicion of power, and our desire to find meaning beyond Earth, than it does about the ancient past. Night descends once more on Mesopotamia. The stars glimmer above the silent plains where the Tigris and Euphrates once nourished the first cities. Crumbled bricks and fractured ziggurats lie scattered across the desert, but the voices of the past still whisper from clay tablets and carved stone. Here, at the birthplace of writing, kingship, and law, the Anunnaki remain, present not in flesh but in memory, recorded by the earliest scribes. The sources speak plainly. In hymns, the Anunnaki are invoked as decreers of destinies. In the Atrahasis epic, they are weary gods who shape humankind to bear labor. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, they weigh the limits of mortality and kingship. On the stele of Hammurabi, Shamash delivers symbols of justice to the king, an image that echoes older Sumerian traditions where power was granted by the divine. These texts and artifacts confirm the role of the Anunnaki as gods who shaped human order through myth, ritual, and law. Archaeology reinforces this picture. The great ziggurat of Ur, dedicated to Nana, symbolized the bond between heaven and earth. Excavations at Eridu reveal centuries of temples layered one upon another, sanctuaries to Enki that grew with each generation. Cylinder seals, once pressed into clay to authenticate documents, show deities presiding over rulers, not machines. The evidence in the soil and stone points consistently to religion and kingship, not to visitors from another world. And yet, the fascination with the Anunnaki extends far beyond their historical role. Their myths of descent from the heavens, of gods who measured the cosmos and decreed the fates of men, have left fertile ground for speculation. Modern imagination has transformed them into astronauts, rulers from distant planets, or architects of humanity itself. Books, documentaries, and television have recast them as cosmic travelers, a reinterpretation that reveals less about ancient Sumer and more about our own era's desire for mystery. The endurance of the Anunnaki lies in their adaptability. To the Sumerians, they were guardians of cosmic balance. To the Babylonians, they were divine judges within Marduk's restructured pantheon. To the Assyrians, they sanctioned imperial conquest and power. In the modern age, they have become symbols of conspiracy, extraterrestrial speculation, and alternative history. Each generation reshapes them according to its questions and anxieties. For historians, the lesson is clear. The Anunnaki matter not because they were astronauts, but because they illuminate how early humans understood their place in the universe. They reveal how politics and religion fused in the world's first states. They show how myths gave order to floods, famines, and wars, transforming uncertainty into meaning. The true power of the Anunnaki lies in what they tell us about the origins of civilization itself. Yet their story remains suspended between certainty and wonder. We can read their hymns, translate their laws, excavate their temples, and still the question persists. Were they only gods of clay and imagination, or did the Sumerians preserve a memory of something beyond? The evidence weighs heavily toward myth, but the fascination endures precisely because the line between symbol and experience is never entirely clear. Standing among the ruins beneath a sky ablaze with stars, we are reminded why the Anunnaki endure. They invite us to look both backward and upward, backward to the dawn of civilization, when humankind first inscribed its gods in clay, upward to the cosmos, where mystery still calls. Their legacy is not proof of alien visitation, but testimony to humanity's eternal need to connect Earth with heaven. And so the Anunnaki remain, between heaven and earth. Gods to the Sumerians, myths to historians, mysteries to seekers. Their story is unfinished, carried forward each time we search the skies or read the words pressed into clay 5,000 years ago.